Hi, everyone. Hope your week is going well so far. We are going to dive into Ecclesiastes 3 and 4 this week. So we're speeding up from this point forward. We're going to take, which means that we can't dive in deeply to every issue that comes up in the text. So you're going to have to kind of lead knowing that. I think a lot of the central issues, like things are going to start to repeat a little bit, um, which will help us kind of get through. So let's jump right into chapter 3. Chapter 3 starts with a passage. You know, there's a time for everything. There's a season for everything. I'm going with the time translation, although I don't think there's a big difference. But what I think the teacher is doing here is he is showing us like this is what life is. These are the extremes of life, like a time to be born, a time to die. Um, and there's more to life than being born and dying, but he's showing us like these are the extremes and there's everything in between them. Um, and then we're going to see more of why he's doing this in just a minute. But for now, in the study, just take it for what it is and recognize that there is a time for each of these things. You're not always mourning and you're not always dancing. And so I think the appropriate place to recognize right now first is like, okay, are you in any of these times? But I think more than that is, are there any of these that you try to avoid? Are there any of these that you think, no, this should always be good? Like we should always be laughing or we should always be dancing. And maybe you're not leaving room for weeping or mourning where that's appropriate in a broken world. Um, so I think the first thing that these verses do is they challenge us to think about the reality of life, and we need to come to terms with that and recognize that there's a time with all these things, and where we recognize like maybe we're ignoring one of these parts of life, or maybe we're avoiding some of them. That's important for us to see and to come to terms with it, because the Bible gives voice to a lot of range of emotions and things like that in light of a broken world. Now, there's some ones that are a little bit hard to understand. I'm not going to spend too much time on that here, but see my notes, especially note number 2, that talks about these things. Briefly, what I'll say is that Ecclesiastes is not pretending that we live in a perfect world. It's not saying like war is good or killing is good, but it's saying like, hey, this is the reality of what life is right now. And to ignore those things would be like if he didn't put those things in a list, it would be kind of avoiding reality. So he's acknowledging that. So the next section we have 9 to 15, and here and really what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 9 to 15, understand the point of it, 16 to 22, understand the point of it, and then get to application. That's my plan for these sections. So in 9 to 15, I think this might be a tricky question to study. In verses 1 to 8, he's asking us. He re-asks his question in verse 9. What does the worker gain from his toil? I can't remember if it's worded too differently, but it's the same basic question. What do we gain from our toil? And again, he's saying that the answer is no. He's acknowledging like the world is. Hold on, it says my connection is unstable. All right, I hope it's better now. I don't want you to miss this part. Saying in 1 through 8, like, look, the world is this way. To try to change it or to not come to grips with that is hevel. It's to chase after the wind, to try to think that the world is a different place. It's beyond our control. And by acknowledging these extremes of life, some of them good, some of them not as pleasing to us, we have to acknowledge that once again, that we cannot beat the world as it is. But we see an additional element here, which has been implicit the whole time, but he's going to say more explicitly, look, God is in control of all things. Anything good at all, or anything period, is under God's sovereign control. Now, I think so. That's okay. That's the first thing to acknowledge. I think that what's really interesting here is verse 11. It says in my translation, "He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end." think this is key to understanding what the teacher is doing here. So in verse 11, you're like, okay, what does it mean that he's setting eternity in the hearts of men? So he's saying, in one sense, I've set eternity in the hearts of men, yet we cannot fathom what God has done. So here's what I believe is happening here. And I have the summary here. The point is that mortals, people, share with God a sense of the whole sweep of time. So we have something in us that understands time, that understands vaguely and confusingly this idea of eternity and the time passes and everything. God gave us that innate sense, and that is unique, I think, to us as humans. At the same time, we cannot really comprehend or control time, right? Like it is always kind of out of our grasp and slipping away from us. Um, a goofy song just time came into my head. Time keeps on slipping, slipping, slipping. Yeah, I think it's that idea that like God has put eternity into our hearts, and at the same time, it's like we have just enough of a glimpse, but not really enough. Fully get it and fully understand it. So my next question is, why does God do this? And I believe that the answer has something to do with that it draws us to the mindset described in 12 to 15. So we have this sense of time, just enough to help us see that like all we can do is enjoy life for what it is. Like like we're not God. We can't understand everything. We shouldn't have this illusion that we usually do, that we can do something with time or do something with our lives that we can't. And so this very sense that we have, that we're just, it's like we just can't do, we have this sense, I'm sorry, this is hard to explain, just this sense of time, but not enough to control or manipulate it. It should draw us to the mindset of 12 to 15. That is a little confusing. I'm taking a long time to explain it. Let me know if you want to chat. Okay. Whew. Moving on, in the list in verse 1 to 8 is supposed to kind of show us that. So moving on to 16 to 18, we're going to skip over 16 to 17 just because the idea, I think, is discussed in chapter 4. So just know that if people ask a question, engage if you want, but I think we can say, like, hold tight on that. Just hold that thought. Let's get to that when we get to chapter 4. And you can come back and reference if you want to. The message here, he's not saying you are animals, but he's saying you're no different, not in the sense that you die. And I think what's really important here, there's an interesting story in the book of Daniel where, uh, is it Nebuchadnezzar? Maybe it's one of those guys. He's like given the sense of being an animal. I can't remember exactly. I read about it in my book here, but just this idea, like we get in our minds that we are like God, that we, you know, uh, I know we understand that we're going to die, but there's this immortal sense to us that we're like are more than we are. I think he's just reminding you here, like you're actually not different than an animal, not in your like intellectual sense and that you're made in the image of God, but in the sense that you, like an animal, are mortal and will die. And this is supposed to humble us and remind us that we're not God, we are mortal. Um, and so we can think, okay, in what ways do I view my life in a way that is not compatible with this idea that I'm just a person? Okay, so that's what those sections are saying. Now, I think the application, there's many things you could say. Some of them we discussed last week. So what I focused on here is, okay, so first of all, he's challenging us with the right way to think about life. And we've discussed this last week. I have that in parentheses. What I want to focus on here is that we live in this age of individualism, which says, I can only trust myself, basically. Everything is kind of about me. Even my relationship with God is often just that, my relationship with God. It's focused on me. We can see ourselves falling into that individualistic way of thinking in many different facets of life. This section is going to challenge us to think less in a self-centered way and more in a God-centered way. So to steal an image from Eagle Eyrie a couple of years ago, often we are the center of the wheel of our lives, right? Like all of life revolves around us. What would look different about your life if God became the cog in the wheel of your life, the center of that wheel? What would that shift look like for you if we moved away from that individualism, that self-centered way of thinking? And if you have time, Christianity is not anti-fun. The summer camp that I love to go to speak at and I worked at, one of their affirmations of the camp, as silly as it sounds, is that you can be a Christian and have fun. That is one of the things they want kids to walk away with. I think that is actually really important. Christians should enjoy life. We should not walk around being sad and, well, it's okay to be sad. Walk around being like, oh, Jesus is watching. Like I must, you know, bow my head and be like just a rules based people. But really, God is calling us to enjoy life and what He's given us. And real quickly, I'll just say I think there's a fine line between legalism, which I would say is anti-fun, and honoring God. So what is that line? How do you honor God but not fall into legalism? Easy question. I'm sure you'll nail it. Okay, let's get to chapter 4. I'm going to flip my pages here. I have the text in front of me. Chapter 4. I make noises when I'm turning pages. Okay. So in the first 3 verses here, oh wait, I'm already ahead of myself. First, what I'd like you to do is to get everyone to share an answer to this question. What are your basic life goals? Please stress to them, just be really brief, just quickly. Like my life goal would be to get a good job or have kids or whatever. Don't allow people stress to be just a real quick, like 30 seconds, because this can go on forever. The reason is I think we're going to come back to it in this section. So in verses 1 to 3, we see oppression, this idea of oppression. He's mourning over that. And what I want to say real quickly about oppression is that often we think of oppression in this big, obvious sense where we're like, maybe like race issues in our country, or maybe like you think of like the Holocaust and the oppression of the Jews, or something like that. But what I want to suggest is that oppression can take place in just basic life in the way that we live it. I like this definition. Oppression is accumulation, the seeking after profit. What's key is without regard to the nature, needs, and rights of other people. The way that American life is built is that as we seek accumulation, if we're not careful, that accumulation will come on the backs of the poor, those with no voice, the powerless. And what I think we see in the Bible very clearly is that God does not want this kind of thing. Real quickly, I'll say that the Old Testament law is super concerned with social equality. I know you might think I'm talking about politics. I am not. I'm talking about the Bible. Politics aside, regardless of your party, it is central to not just the New Testament, but the whole Bible, that we have a care and concern for the social equity of people. Now, Jesus is going to acknowledge you will always have the poor among you, and that's true. But remember the story of Zacchaeus. What did redemption look like? It involved Zacchaeus paying back what he had extorted from the people. So I really think that the heart of God, the heart of the gospel, will lead us not just to love God in some pious sense where our religion is right, but we see that loving God is tied up with loving people. I think that is just the very heart of the gospel. So anyway, I think, I could talk about this all day, but anyway, moving on. A part of the heart for this advancement, this achievement mindset that's especially prevalent in the United States is envy. So envy, right, is you look at what someone else has and you want that thing, or you see someone else succeeding and you instead of like celebrating their success, you're like, I want to be great. This happens to me a lot, unfortunately. So I hope you can, I don't hope you experience envy, but hopefully you can pinpoint those points of envy in your life so that you can reckon with them. And what I think you'll see is that envy creates alienation, which leads, you can see how teacher sees envy as the root of this, which leads to extortion and achievement and trying to climb the ladder as you step on people's heads. And again, often we do this unconsciously. So what we need to consider, I think, is what are your life goals? Because I think if we're honest, a lot of our life goals be like, I want to get a job, I want to advance, I want to succeed. I'd like to ask you to consider what would change about the goal of your life if you were to root out individualistic thinking in favor of communal thinking? This is a very anti-American dream. You're going to think I'm being socialist, but read this parable and Luke here and think like, what does this accumulation of wealth that we're so obsessed with, what does this mean? How does this align with the heart of God? And I just don't think that it does. So I hope this is challenging for you. It's challenging for me. Moving on real quickly. I know I'm going long. The last section here is there's some couplets here that point to like being alone, not good. Being in community, great. Um, and so I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Um, Community, good. Seek out community. Um, Again, I think it's easy to grasp, but if you want to chat, let me know. Finally, the last four verses, 13 to 16, they're a bit tricky to understand. My paraphrase I grabbed from the ESV Study Bible, I think is super helpful for getting the point, and I think it puts a nice little bow on the large point of these sections. For my challenges this week, I think we need to recognize that change and alleviation of oppression and care for our brother, which I think is one of the big focuses of this section, moving your focus away from yourself to God and others. We often think that the only change that matters is this big social change. That'd be great, but I think that all that we can do really is what you can do in your daily life. How can you live your life in an other-centered, God-glorified way? I have a few steps here. I'll highlight the first one. I have some resources down there dealing with fair trade, and I think this is really cool. I'll note especially that a BCM alum runs an organization called Hands Producing Hope. Rebecca Gardner runs that organization. It's about selling the goods of women who are refugees and who are impoverished, and helping support their lives, and giving their products a market at a fair cost. And yeah, so I think that these sections really speak to me in a lot of ways, and I hope they do for you too. I've chatted a long time because I think there's some confusing stuff going on in here, but let me know if you want to talk more. Of course, I'm here for that. So have a good week. Talk to you soon.